Okay, we're going to start.
Round two.
Round two, block two. Data transparency and the last mile. Yeah, okay. Product identity mismatches, legacy systems, and the absence of transaction level control. So topic one, the identity problem. A GPO negotiates a contract with manufacturers under a specific commodity code. By the time that product reaches a hospital invoice, it may carry a different commercial name, a different distributor, SKU, and sometimes a different unit of measure. So the question is, how do you ensure that you provide the transparency of your data to ensure the outcome is achieved and money infused back into patient care? Where do you see the ownership lies?
Good question. I think the ownership lies with both parties. I think actually all parties, I think it relies with the GPOs, but I also think it relies, health systems have a responsibility there, and I think our vendors and distributors have a responsibility there.
So you just passed the buck to everyone, Jeremy.
But I think they're all part of the problem, right? So
Okay.
manufacturers using different numbers, different things, distributors and adding their own version of it. The lack of a standard way of doing this is, we should create a standard. Like, that should happen. I do think technology starts to eat away. There's ways to do that with technology. AI can very easily recognize this thing's called it 100 different ways, and it knows it's the same thing, right?
It's not that easy.
It's not that easy, but
it's possible.
It's possible, right? It's becoming more possible. You're not reliant on that industry standard anymore. You can use technology to potentially do that. I do think hospitals have a responsibility, because we feed data to our GPOs, right? But our item masters are not well done, right? They're littered with inaccuracy, all those types of things. I do think as a health system, I feel it's my responsibility to do my part of that and feed that data upstream to help inform for both myself to know what am I really getting the value I'm supposed to be getting? Am I seeing things diverge where I'm not noticing? I do think that's on us. But then I think when you feed that upstream.
Are you seeing the value of, let's say, it takes time to actually feed it up, and then are you seeing the outcome from feeding them?
No, and I think that's where I think that expectation that goes into. I want my GPO partner, right, to take that data and use it more advantageously to drive value for myself, for the industry, where I'm not seeing them leverage that data in that way yet. And I think that's there, but I think partly we have to own that, but when we feed it upstream, I do think they need to leverage it better.
Okay. Fantastic. Topic number two. The manual reality inside an analog system. So I want to try and change the perspective a little bit. Healthcare procurement remains one of the least digitalized operational functions in any industry. Contract data updated manually in some instances. Item masters maintained by hand in some instances. Pricing discrepancies resolved when they are resolved through individual effort rather than systematic, let's say, automation. So the question, where do you see the biggest gaps caused by manual efforts?
The biggest gap caused by manual efforts? There's no way the biggest gap is by not doing that. Your pricing changes, you're not getting there. It very easily falls off, right? Your ability to monitor savings, ability to ensure you maintain those savings, all disappears if you do it manually. Like, if you're doing everything manually, there's not enough people to keep track of all of that, especially the amount of SKUs a health system has, right? So I think that reliance in I think the underinvestment in supply chain in the industry creates a lot of loss of value because they're not recognizing that. I do think that I want to digitize everything in my supply chain. I want my contracts loaded. I want a virtual item master, all those things. And we do have those things. And then we're keeping that enabling tools to keep those systems clean. That lets me really see my value and actually see where I can drive value or where I'm starting to lose value.
Can you see that where you say where I'm losing value associated with that? Is that a KPI that you
where I'm losing value? We're not. I would say I want to get better at that. Like, we do see some of it, but what I want to see is you negotiate. You mentioned it. You negotiated for this item. Well, as soon as you do that item, the manufacturer's incentivized to try to upsell a different item, right? So, am I seeing that shift? Am I even within the SKU of there's 10 items on the list? You negotiate all of them, right? There's a more expensive one. The one you're using maybe is in the middle, and there's a lower cost one, but you negotiate all of them.
Yeah.
You think you're getting, like, I'm based it on this one in the middle that we use. All of a sudden, when you get the contract, that price drops.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I said we're using a more expensive one. Seeing that and be able to go back to our clinicians going, hey, why are you shifting?
Right.
I think that's something we're trying to get better at.
Okay.
But having that data is something you can start to do.
Okay.
So.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, topic number 3. Purchase services, the invisible spend. Purchase. Oh, yeah, it is. So, purchase services, IT facilities, legal staffing can represent up to 45% of non-labor operating costs in a healthcare system. Unlike medical supplies, they carry no SKU, no commodity code, or no unit of measure. So the question is, how have you seen the GPO model evolve to structurally manage purchase services spend as clinical is believed to be under control? And I put believed because my past experience. So how organizations respond to this given that 45% of the spend is accounted for in purchase services?
Yeah. And believe, I think, is a good. I think what's been done so far in the industry through the GPO lens, is pretty much just more of getting their arms around the spend, not necessarily driving a lot of value within it. So what is categorization, taking all the spend and saying, oh, that's EVS, that's landscaping, that where you can start seeing it, where it's not disparate. There's other ways to do that, like driving all your contracts through a central and saying, I'm going to categorize it myself. But I see a lot of that. That's where GPOs have been focused on, just more of wrapping their arms around it so they understand it and they can help the health systems understand it, but not necessarily then now how do you drive value now that you're starting to get your arms around it and create some categorization, things like that. So I think that's where the next level is, and I don't think that that's really happened all that much other than, hey, here's this mystery, hundreds of millions of dollars. It's less mysterious. It's still a little mysterious, but less mysterious. But to do that, to create benchmarks and all those types of things, you have to do that first. And I think getting that benchmarking, which is more complicated, thinking through it, that's kind of the next level that needs to happen.
Okay. And then from your perspective, you seen any sort of structural changes? Because, at the end of the day, if this model has been around for 100 years, it's a known, right? So have you seen any structural changes that you can extract and give people a view on?
Sure. From a GPO? I think GPOs are shifting because the traditional model, the value is not super strong. But what they do have is they have a ton of data. They now, several of them, like get all the clinical data, right? They have a lot of spend data. Even if you take the spend that's not going through their contracts, if you submit spend, they get a lot of spend submitted that are local agreements, all that. So they have a lot of localized, a lot of spend, a lot of clinical data, right? So I see.
But what about in purchase services? With
services, with regards to that, they have the spend. They're trying to make sense of the spend so they can drive value. I think that's where I see them shifting, and how do they use that data to help drive value, not just like use our contract, but how do we help health systems, help the industry drive value using actual data that's cleaner, more effective. I think they're shifting to that. How do they invest in technology to support that? How do they develop technology to support that? I think they're chasing that. I think the data they have is their gold mine. That's what they need to, they're trying to, I see them shifting their thinking towards how do we add value through this, not through just core contract. They'll still do the core contracting, but that value of pricing, it's the data, I think, that's driving their next. They're evolving to that, being big data companies, and how do we use this data to drive value?
Right, right.
Yeah.
And I suppose the most recent one was the announcement of Palantir with Premier, just as an example.
Yeah, exactly. They're investing in technology.
Done. Look at that. Bill,
Yes.
block 2,
All right.
the data transparency and the last mile. So we talked about that at the entry point. But product identity, mismatches, legacy systems, and the absence of transaction level control. So topic 1, the identity problem. So we want to reveal, for example, the GPO negotiates a contract with a manufacturer under specific commodity code. By the time that product reaches the hospital invoice, it may carry different commercial name, a different distributor, a SKU, MPC, and sometimes a different unit of measure. So the question is, how do you ensure that you provide transparency of your data to ensure the outcome is achieved? And money infused back into patients' healthcare, where do you see where the ownership actually lies?
Yeah, it's unfortunately pretty opaque because there are so many layers within the process between contract and actual those that are utilizing a negotiated paid kind of price on a product. And health systems are very complex. There's lots of these spend categories. They even struggle to standardize on their own. And so with many different systems in place within a health system, and there is an ongoing need to try to find data integrity within its own health system, let alone you add in a couple of other intermediaries, the GPO, the distributor, going back to original contracted price. There's all this indirect pricing and layers. So unfortunately, it's unnecessarily confusing. I would say it that way. And
so where have you seen, even in your own experience, to try and extract that level of transparency, back out and to, because everyone has the client, which is the health system. Health system has the patient. You have then has got to try and make that as crystal clear, on their billing.
Yeah, unfortunately, some of the master data management and the item masters, those are not kept up well in order to be referencing. And I think that, in a simplified world, you're negotiating a price that you believe is competitive in nature to your volume and that you'd like to be done by the GPO.
Yeah.
But moving forward, there's often not enough resources on this. In my opinion, you see limited resources on the hospital supply chain team in order to be effectively managing that sort of data integrity against the price and against the contract. And the IT departments are under enormous strain at health systems with what are legacy systems and trying to modernize into new systems. So I think you are left where there isn't necessarily a single-threaded leader that is going in and keeping an eye on the pricing and the data integrity within the supply chain.
Okay, that's good. So then the topic 2, the manual reality inside an analog system. So it's a beautiful segue into this. See, we do our research with regards to the way that we see it's actually going to fall. So healthcare procurement remains one of the least digitalized operational functions in any major industry. You reflected upon global, other industry, GPOs. Contract data updated manually, item masters maintained by hand in some instances, pricing discrepancies resolved when they are resolved. And then through individual effort rather than systematic control or automation. So, question.
Yes.
Where do you see the biggest gaps caused by manual effort?
Number one, I think that there's an inherent observation right within there. When you're doing a manual effort like that, anytime that you have somebody having to go back in and taking things offline outside of, let's say, an API, like there's a problem right then and there. And so I think, it's quite unfortunate, but a reality that when you look at the provider types, they are having to go in and manually intervene to be double checking, because you can't trust all parties. Within unfortunately, for what's being charged, what should be charged,
Yep.
and for that there hasn't been the use of easy tech in the past in order to audit. Now our world's changing, so I'm touching on a topic that's central to Hunter AI,
Right.
the ability to go in and pull out all of the different data to be able to do that sort of accountability. But it shouldn't be as manual intervening as it is today. And, yet it is. And so...
but that's also because of legacy infrastructure, legacy applications, and then what I've always experienced is, since organizations have actually brought assets, companies that might actually have that technology 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 2 years ago, they are reluctant to mothball that investment to actually then switch into something like... is relevant today that can actually solve that problem.
That's right. Yeah, and I think again, one of the problems is the number of organizations that you're relying upon. There isn't a single authority per se. When you're looking at all of the different types of spend categories, the different types of software services that can be provided, so relying only on an ERP system, or having only an item master that you are internally managing, where it's dependent upon others, it leaves a lot to be desired. And I think, it's quite common to be going and doing audits and finding lots of discrepancy between what was negotiated or set in place, what's not being kept updated because of the legacy systems, the variety of parties involved, and
hallelujah, opportunity.
Yeah, it is. It's a pretty big opportunity for health systems.
So you actually another bit of segue, but we are way over time. But I'm still going to give you 2 to 3 minutes, 2 minutes to actually answer this.
Yeah,
really critical.
Yeah,
purchase services.
Yes.
The invisible spend.
Yes.
Okay. So the context is purchase services, IT facilities, legal staffing, everything that we discussed at dinner last night can represent up to 45% of non-labor operating costs in a health system.
Yes.
Unlike medical supplies, they carry no SKU, no commodity code, no unit of measure, and a little bit squidgy, I think was the word that you used last night, which was really good. So have you seen the GPO model has evolved to structurally manage purchase services spend as clinical is believed to be under control? Okay, and I'd say believed to be under control. So how have you seen organizations respond to this, given that that there's 45% of the spend is accounted for in purchase services?
Yeah, it's a great opportunity for modern data and system tools to be able to go in and help with the right auditing, but the right benchmarking. And so, no, I hear from customers that they don't feel that the GPO value today is defined with purchase services. It helps with the contracting process. It helps to identify certain suppliers, but the same rigor that can go into supply negotiated pricing does not equate over to the purchase services side. And it can be very regional. It can be, you pay for what you get, people say. But there is still an opportunity to put in better benchmarks and of course, audits on that. And even with some of the companies that are out there today, it has a lot lot of opportunity from what I understand.
Bam! You've just made it with regards to the 2 minutes.
Good.
Bill.
All right.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeff.